they're like, oh, there's a piercing and an exchanging of fluids. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
By that logic, a dog bite is a sexual allegory in a story.
Oh man, Cujo makes me so horny.
Content warning. This podcast is not suitable for children or those who are easily disturbed. Trigger warning for grooming and sexual manipulation. Spoiler warning for Carmilla and Dracula. And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share and subscribe. Follow the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. Follow Daniel at DStarSick on Twitter. Ryan is at Darth Damio on the Bluebird app. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for links to our Facebook group and Discord server. Enjoy our horror gaming content on YouTube. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/the Horror of Babylon. Finally, you can let your friends know that the Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible and all other major podcast apps. Stay scary.
Welcome to episode 31 of the Horror of Babylon, where we are discussing Carmilla. I'm Ryan, and with me as always is Daniel. Say hi, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
Before we get into it, we had an exciting announcement on our social media last week. We are going to be appearing as invited guests at DualCon in Charleston, West Virginia on February 11th, 2023. DualCon is a gaming convention. It's called DualCon because it's both board games, tabletop games, card games, and video and PC gaming. It is a charity event to benefit the American Suicide Prevention Foundation.
It's actually one of my favorite charities.
Yeah, they're a good one. I have given to them and done and gone to events and stuff before.
It's like them and Children's Miracle Network.
Yeah.
And then the Humane Society is probably my third.
Yep. Those are all good ones. It's going to be, like I said, on Saturday, February 11th in Charleston, West Virginia at the Charleston Civic Center. They have the main hall. We are going to have a booth there where you can come and meet us. We're going to have some swag available. There will be more specifics on that on the show and on our social media as we get closer to the event. And we are going to be hosting a couple panels, which we are cooking up ideas for those now. More details will come out on that as we get closer to the event. We were super happy to be invited and super happy to go.
Super stoked. If you're able to come by chance, come meet us.
Yeah, if you're in that area at all, the Huntington, Charleston, if you're on that side of Kentucky or the southern part of Ohio, it's not that far away. So, definitely come and meet us. Come say hello. We would love to meet any listeners.
And it all goes to a good cause.
Yeah.
So.
For sure. And I guarantee you won't forget our panels.
Yeah.
I won't go into details, but we have done panels at conventions before. And
we've made an impression.
Yes, an impression was made.
Some of it good, some of it bad. Mostly
bad, but
I heard just as many good things.
Yeah,
so. I just remember the one dude that sat behind us. What were we in? Was it like we weren't at the concert yet?
Maybe, I don't know.
I just remember thinking it was really funny because they were talking about it and we were right there.
Yeah, my memory is fuzzy of that.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I think that and I think we were doing root beer and peppermint schnapps.
Oh god, that's right.
Yeah,
we walked all the way to the convention center and tanked.
Yeah, not a good idea. Dumb things. All right, so let's talk about Carmilla, and let's kick it off with our history with the book. Daniel, what about you?
I was tacitly aware of Carmilla because it's one of those things where people who read a lot of books go, it predates Dracula.
Yeah, it does.
Hey, yeah, I'm like, yes, that's factually accurate. You saying that doesn't make you a literary expert.
it makes you an expert on a single fact.
Yeah.
I know this fact and I know it well.
Yeah. You hear it the first time, you go, oh, wow, okay, cool, I'll read that. But then people keep bringing it up. I've seen her name referenced in a lot of things. I saw it in Castlevania a lot.
Yep.
That was pretty much all from my experience. This past year, I read it just because I had the opportunity to, and then I reread it for this podcast. It was short. It didn't take me any time at all to do.
Yeah, it's a novella. It's very short. I was not really aware of it at all until last year, and after I read Dracula, I was going back and reading some other 19th century vampire fiction. And Carmilla was one of the books I read, and then I read it a second time for this podcast, so I'm excited to talk about it.
The vampires are pure myth, superstition. I may be able to bring you proof that the superstition of yesterday can become the scientific reality of today.
Let's jump into background and give you a little bit more information on the author and the book.
I'm going to let you pronounce this dude's name.
It's written by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. He is an Irish author, despite the French-sounding name. I did a little bit of research on him and his parents, and I couldn't get like a good explanation if like they were from France or if they had a French, patron of the family.
I spent my entire history believing this dude was French.
Yeah, I couldn't get like a good answer on that. It seems like they're all Irish and from Ireland.
And reading this book made me feel he was French.
I just recently read a history of Ireland 1500 to 2000, and he's not mentioned in it at all. Granted, they didn't spend a lot of time on literature, and when they did, it was mostly just James Joyce.
I don't know who that is.
Blah, 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 blah. He wrote that really famous book, Ulysses.
Oh.
Yeah.
And now I feel dumb.
Yeah, they just mentioned him and Bram Stoker because they're probably the two most famous Irish authors.
I should have known he was Irish.
Well, Bram Stoker is always identified as being English, but he was Irish. He was born and lived in Ireland. Mm-hmm. He moved to England as a young man and got involved in the theatrical world of London. And then started writing.
The one book of his I know takes place in London, so all I can think about is London.
Yeah, he's one of those people that kind of dances between the two cultures, but he was Irish. He was born in Ireland. His family's from Ireland.
Yeah. That's just cool to know. I like learning things.
Sheridan Le Fanu was born in 1814, died 1873. Carmilla is his most famous work. It's from the novella collection In a Glass Darkly, which was published in 1872. Some other stories from that collection. One is called Green Tea, and the summary is a haunting narrative of a man plagued by a demonic monkey.
I want to read that.
And I was like, okay, I instantly put that on our short list. Like, we're going to cover that at some point.
Monkey.
There's also Mr. Justice Harbottle, which is a panorama of hell. Another book he wrote was called The Rose and the Key, 1871. It describes the horrors of a private lunatic asylum. So,
now, that sounds like something I would really like.
Yeah, so I think The Rose and the Key and Green Monkey might be things to cover at some point in the future.
Okay.
So, Carmilla is one of the classic Gothic horror novels, and we're getting fancy. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, a Gothic novel is a European romantic pseudo-medieval fiction that has a prevailing atmosphere of mystery and terror. Its heyday was the 1790s, but it underwent frequent revivals in subsequent centuries. So, some other classic Gothic novels, obviously, Dracula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably, like, the go-to example for most people.
Yep. And spoiler alert, we're going to talk about Dracula a lot during this as well, because there's a lot of comparisons, and it's something that people bring up, as Daniel said earlier.
And we'll eventually cover Dracula, but it's probably going to turn into one of our standard episodes.
Yeah, I
know at least 2 movie adaptations I want to do, if not 3.
I would like to do Nosferatu, the Bela Lugosi one, and probably the Christopher Lee one.
Oh God, I also wanted Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula.
Okay, that's 4. I'm fine with doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually my favorite one. I don't know if that's a
I haven't
hot
seen
take.
that one.
It's after reading this, it actually probably has more in common with Carmilla than it does Dracula.
So what were your other two? That Francis Ford Coppola, probably Nosferatu, and what was the third one that you said you wanted to do?
Bela Lugosi. I wanted to do Francis Ford Coppola, and one of the Hammer films, or there's the Hammer Dracula films, which don't have a lot to do with the book. But then there's a second Christopher Lee Dracula movie, which is almost a direct adaptation of the book.
Yeah, that's the one I was talking about.
So that's maybe 5.
I mean, I'm fine with it. I love Dracula.
Yeah, I really like Dracula.
We can spend 2 months on Dracula.
Yeah, we can space it with other stuff. So
there's the original novel. There's Powers of Darkness, which is the Swedish version of the novel that is an alternate take that Bram Stoker took on it. There's the short story Dracula's Guest by Bram Stoker, and then his grand nephew Darcy Stoker wrote a prequel and a sequel to Dracula.
I have the prequel. I have the sequel.
I've read the prequel. I have not read the sequel.
Yeah, I bought the sequel when I saw it in a bookstore like years ago because I was like, that sounds amazing. The great grandnephew, I must read this.
The prequel was really good.
Yeah.
I think other than Salem's Lot, it's probably my favorite modern vampire novel.
That's pretty good. That's pretty high praise.
Okay, so needless to say, when we get to Dracula, we'll go deep on it. Yeah. Moving on, Carmilla, as we said, was published in 1872. It was a huge, right back to Dracula, it was a huge influence on Bram Stoker. It does predate Dracula, as Daniel said earlier, because Dracula was published in 1897. However, there is another vampire piece of fiction that was very influential that even predates Carmilla. The Vampire by John William Polidori, first published on April 1st, which is hilarious, in 1819.
That's been on my reading list for years. I still haven't gotten to it.
I read it last year. I enjoy it. I think Carmilla and Dracula are both much better, but it is good. It's worth reading. It's super short.
When did Varney the Vampire come out?
Okay. I think that was publishing around the same time as Sherlock Holmes.
Okay. I was just curious, because that's another one of those classic vampire stories that people keep bringing up.
I've read one Varney the Vampire story, 1845, so I was a little off.
Yeah, but still, that's later.
I got a collection on Audible. Let me see if I can just pull it up real quick. That's just all 19th century vampire literature.
Your library is probably more extensive than mine. I have 4 books on my Audible.
Salem's Lot, Taipan, and Carmilla.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am the Taipan.
Yeah, I have a couple hundred books in mine. If you're interested in a lot of these and you have an Audible account, great classic vampire stories. It's an anthology of a bunch of different vampire fiction. Let's see if they list out what's in here. Okay, so The Vampire by John Polidori, which we mentioned. The Family of the Vortilacs by Alexei Tolstoy. That's 1839. So that one actually predates Carmilla and Dracula as well. The End of My Journey by Lord Byron, 1816. That one's older as well. Varney the Vampire, 1847. That one's older. Carmilla is in the collection, 1872. A True Story of a Vampire by Eric Count Stenbach, and that's 1894. And Count Magus by M.R. James, 1904. I read all of these. Most of them are pretty good. The standouts are Carmilla, The Family of the Vortilac, and The Vampire.
Family of the Vortilac is a great name.
Yeah, no, it's a Russian story about a guy who goes to this village that is completely overrun with the vampires. It's basically like Salem's Lot. Mm-hmm. It's really cool.
Oh, I'll check that out.
I think I put it on our short list. Okay. Carmilla was first published in the magazine The Dark Blue, which is a London-based literary magazine. It was serialized, similar to a lot of things of the time, including Sherlock Holmes. Mm-hmm. It was republished in Le Fanu's collection In a Glassy Dark, as we mentioned earlier. And Carmilla may have been inspired by a real historic figure named Elizabeth Bathory. So without getting too much into her story, she was the wife of a Hungarian nobleman who tortured and murdered a bunch of women in her husband's employ, and there were a bunch of rumors going around that she ate parts of their body, that she would drain the blood out of them into a bathtub and then bathe in their blood to get their beauty.
Be younger, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of these are stories. Like, she was a real person. We don't really know what's real and what's not.
If I can find it, I'll link it to you later, because you'll probably like something like this, which was something that some historian wrote. I don't know historians by name. She alleged that almost all the stories about Elizabeth Bathory are untrue. They were created by her political enemies.
It's very possible.
Yeah, who knows at this point? I think too much time has passed. I like the legends.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't... I mean, they don't have to be true to be cool.
Yeah. But I also think that it's cool to hear, like... What would you call that? Like opposing history theories?
Yeah.
Okay, so I enjoy reading stuff like that, like alternate take.
There are a ton of adaptions of this book. Currently, we're not planning to cover any of them. We couldn't cover all of them if we tried. The same as Dracula. That would be our whole podcast if we just tried to do all the adaptations. We may do one at some point if we feel like it as a bonus episode, but we're just going to review a couple of them. So there's Dracula's Daughter in 1936, which is a direct sequel to Universal's Dracula from 1931 with Bela Lugosi, and that it's loosely based on Carmilla. Hammer Pictures also did The Vampire Lovers in 1970. There is a comic adaptation of Carmilla from 1991. The erotic horror classic of female vampirism. Something, if we did do an adaptation, I think that'd be the one I would.
No, that's the one.
Yeah.
Call Girl of Cthulhu.
There's another comic adaptation, Terrifying Tales of Enchantment and Horror, Vampirus Carmilla, which that one's from 2021. Could be cool. And then some influences and some other adaptations. You may be familiar with Vampirella from Dynamite Comics. There's a lot of Carmilla influence in that character and that story. There is an opera version of Carmilla called Carmilla, A Vampire Tale from 1970. There's a Japanese lesbian magazine named Carmilla. We haven't gotten into it yet, but she's kind of a lesbian icon.
Yeah, I can see why after reading this.
Yes. There is a Carmilla audio drama on Audible, which I have listened to and can recommend, is pretty good. And Carmilla has also appeared in numerous other franchises. She has appeared in Castlevania, Doctor Who, Ultraman, True Blood, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Shadowhunters, Hellsing. So many things.
I still think you should watch the Netflix Castlevania. It's one of the few Netflix adaptations I really recommend.
I would, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's also a popular YouTube web series about Carmilla. It's a modern interpretation about where Laura and Carmilla are dorm mates at an American college. I just watched the first 2 episodes, and I'm going to reserve my opinion because they're only 2 to 3 minutes long, and I only watched 2 episodes of it. But it is very popular. It has literally millions of views. I think the first episode had 1.7 million views. So,
I was looking at the views. I didn't get it, but not everything is built for Daniel.
Yeah, I don't want to judge it based on 2
episodes.
Yeah, 2 3-minute episodes.
Yeah, so.
And Carmilla herself
just showed up.
Yeah, she just appears at the end of the second episode, so I might watch a few more and see what happens.
I kind of liked her flippant attitude.
Yeah.
I'm Carmilla, I'm your new roommate.
And she was cute.
Yeah.
All right, so let's actually talk about the book. And we're going to start with structure and themes, and we're going to go into the structure, which should be a pretty simple conversation. I don't think there's a lot to say about the structure. Do you have any thoughts?
At the beginning, they mentioned these are taken from the papers of Dr. So-and-so.
Yes.
I can't remember his name. He's on our character list here somewhere.
I deleted him because there's like nothing.
There's nothing about him in the actual story. I kept looking for information about him and I couldn't find anything.
Dr. Hessalius,
yeah.
Something like that, yeah. Which
I'm like, that's fine. My only problem with that is he's never really brought up again.
No.
So why don't this is from the Journal of Carmilla. I guess because it was written...
Well, Laura.
Yeah. This is from like 18-something, so it has to come from a man or no one would believe it.
That's terrible.
Tell me I'm wrong, though.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah. I'm not going to tell you that sexism wasn't a thing.
It's still a thing. So. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the only explanation that I could personally come up with was the writer went, no one's going to buy the diary of some girl.
Maybe.
So it has to come from a medical professional.
But aside from that, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's just Laura recounting her experience
from I think it's like the frame narrative is like 10 years later.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, from the time she goes to that the ball when her friend is dead to the vanquishing of Mercala. It's
chronological. The only real divergence we get is when the general tells the story of what happened between his daughter and Carmilla.
Yeah.
So, and that's that wasn't really confusing because it says explicitly, now we're going to tell this story.
Yeah.
So it
gives you an exact break.
Yeah.
Of when we are talking about this, and it tells you when we're back.
So when we discussed Silver Bullet, we had a pretty good discussion on what werewolf tropes were in the movie and what was different, kind of what was the same. Mm-hmm. So in that same vein, what vampire tropes exist within this book? Looking at it from a modern perspective, because obviously at the time vampire tropes weren't as established.
They weren't as established, but even for ones that weren't as established, you see them a lot in the older literature, like feeding on a single person over time.
Yes.
These days you get vampires, they like kill a person a night.
Yes.
I actually prefer this feeding on a single person over time.
Yes.
Hypersexuality is often associated with vampires, and I think it has to come from this book because it doesn't come from Dracula.
No, it doesn't. And that's actually something on our discuss list for later.
You have an aversion to sunlight, but not like a weakness to it.
No, she prefers to sleep throughout the day, but she does wake up in the afternoon, and she will go outside and take walks with Laura. So it's like there's a preference for darkness, but it's not like she'll die.
In these old vampire books, sun didn't kill vampires. I think that my movie and book trivia might be off, so take this with a grain of salt. I believe that originated with Nosferatu, vampires dying in sunlight.
Maybe. I'm not sure.
I believe that's the first instance of it. I could be wrong.
So just some other tropes that are in the book. Obviously sucking blood, having a pale complexion, an unreal beauty, being immortal, sleeping in coffins, shape-shifting.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Although Carmilla shapeshifts into a giant cat.
Yeah.
And normally vampires will turn into a bat or a wolf or
mist.
Yeah, mist. It does imply that she can like have no shape, so
ethereal,
she can get through like
ghost-like
doors and walls and stuff.
I really liked her, personally, her sleeping in the coffin. Mm-hmm. She's just submerged in blood.
Yeah,
I was like, that's great. Mm-hmm. Well, when I got to that, I was like, that imagery is needed more often.
So some things that are different. We mentioned that she doesn't like to, but she can go out in the daylight. It does not kill her. It maybe it like makes her a little weak, but it doesn't like weaken her to the point where she can't do it. Mm-hmm. And as you just mentioned, she doesn't have to sleep in the dirt of her home country like Dracula does.
Yeah.
A huge portion of the Dracula novel is that
he has to like ship it overseas.
He has to bring multiple coffins full of dirt from Transylvania.
Could you imagine that modern day, like a vampire's just like FedExing his dirt?
Well, I like oh crap, I'm having a brain fart. The Night the Night Flyer.
Yeah.
Where he just has a plane.
It's just filled with his dirt.
Yeah, his plane is filled with his dirt, so he can just go where...
If you haven't seen Night Flyer, go watch Night Flyer.
Or read it.
They're both great.
Mm-hmm. Another big difference I noticed was that Carmilla doesn't bite on the neck. She actually bites kind of on the high point of the chest, below the collarbone, and above the breast.
What did we refer to that as for a while? The nipple biting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
how I picture it.
Doesn't actually bite the nipples.
Yeah. But I picture it like a baby feeding.
They always describe it as the breast.
Yeah.
But you don't... I don't think it's actually supposed to be she's chomping on a boob. I think it's supposed to be the high point of the chest that's like between the collarbone and the breast.
You and I pictured it very differently.
Well, it may be that that's what he wanted us to picture, but he couldn't specifically say she's chomping on a boob.
Yeah. Because it was the 1800s.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about this, but it's very influential on Dracula. What are some of the things we see in Dracula that were probably originated in this book?
Definitely sleepwalking.
Sleepwalking is a huge theme in Dracula, and it's something that comes from this.
People dismissing what's going on at first as disease.
Yeah.
The scientific aspects are played up higher in Dracula. I don't know if that's because blood transfusion was really coming into vogue at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know enough about medical history to make that comment.
Yeah, it's also could just be a page count thing because Dracula
is way longer.
Yeah, and then he has a lot more time to spend on that. Bram Stoker is a lot more... How do you say it when you describe your writing? Long-winded or...
Yeah, I'm long-winded.
Yeah.
I like to go on and on about nonsense.
Yeah, and he does too, but
yeah.
I mean, that's not a criticism, it's good.
It's just some people prefer to be concise and other people like to.
Carmilla is very concise, and I was going to save this towards the end, but since we brought it up, if you haven't read this, you haven't read Dracula or Frankenstein, and you're looking to get into classic horror literature, Carmilla is a great starting point because, one, it's extremely short, and two, it's more simply written than a lot of its contemporary books.
Yeah, there's not a lot of, what would you call it, flowery language?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you maybe had trouble reading Charles Dickens in high school,
or H.P. Lovecraft,
or Tolkien, if you had trouble reading Tolkien,
this was very easy to follow.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have a problem following older literature. I love Dracula, but I had a hard time following it my first read through. Mm-hmm. The one exception to that was Frankenstein, and I just think that's because Frankenstein was so good.
Yeah, it's super engaging.
I think that if you're going to get into this type of genre, this type of literature, the two recommendations I would give now would be Carmilla or Frankenstein.
Yeah, and I might lean towards Carmilla just because it's so much shorter. But then if you like it, dive into Dracula, dive into Frankenstein, and lots of good stuff. It opens
up a lot. This will open up doors for you if other ones feel intimidating, or even if they feel boring, because this one is honestly faster paced because it's so much shorter. You're going from beat to beat to beat. And
I read another good one to start with. I read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde last year.
That's still on my reading list.
It's really good, and it's also very short. That's something we could cover too.
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's on my reading list. The Picture of Dorian Gray is on my reading list.
Not read that one.
There's a lot that are on my reading list.
Yeah, we'll add those to our short list so we can... I'd like covering these older books. They're not always as scary as modern books, but that's just I don't want to say generational.
I think we've been desensitized.
Yeah. Okay. So another influence Carmilla had on Dracula, which you've already mentioned, is as opposed to vampires just killing a victim in one go, they slowly drain them over a period of several nights or even several weeks.
Yeah, it's like a parasite almost.
Yeah, and then so much so that the families think the person is sick, they're pale, they feel weak, they can't get out of bed.
They see images and have nightmares.
Yeah. And then Van Helsing, one of the major characters from Dracula, is very similar to General Vandenberg from this novel.
Very.
Yeah,
vampire hunter, occult detective prototypes for Van Helsing.
Yeah, the difference between the two is that the general is fueled by revenge because Carmilla killed his daughter.
Where Van Helsing is almost fueled by just intellectual curiosity.
Yeah, he's a scientist.
Yeah, he's like, man, I wonder if this thing's a goddamn vampire. I'm gonna go do some research for 20 pages.
If you have listened to the show for a little while, the sound clip that we use for the background section, something like,
The vampire's a pure myth, superstition. I may be able to bring you proof that the superstition of yesterday can become the scientific reality of today.
I think I can prove to you that the vampire which was once the mythology of yesterday can become the scientific fact of today. That's Van Helsing from the 1931 Dracula movie. He's a scientist.
Very good movie.
Yeah, great movie.
I think it's a good movie.
I
Have you
do.
seen the Spanish version of it?
No.
There's a Universal made a Spanish version that was they used the same script, but they different cast, different directors. I also recommend watching that.
Sure.
So,
Carmilla and Dracula both pretend to be descendants of themselves, essentially.
yeah.
So they're both, very, very old, and there's portraits of them that exist, and they just play it off like, oh yeah, that's my descendant, when in fact it's actually them.
I have the hooked nose because that is just a dominant trait.
It's a dominant trait. I believe Laura, when they pull out Carmilla's portrait, Laura describes it as a miracle.
Yeah.
And she's like, look, it even has the same mole on the left side of your neck that you have. And
No, you being silly, my friend.
there's no mole.
That is dot I made with permanent marker.
Carmilla takes place in Styria, which used to be its own small little kingdom. Today it's part of Austria, which is the country south of Germany. And Styria is actually where the short story Dracula's Guest takes place. Dracula's Guest is a short story written by Bram Stoker that's kind of a prologue to Dracula.
Carmilla is an anagram. How do they pronounce that? Mercala? And that's tied into the lore. Like, she has to use an anagram. And you actually see this in, like, new shit. Like Helsing. Alucard.
Alucard.
That was also used in a Universal movie.
Yeah.
With Dracula's son, Alucard. And it's used in Castlevania. And I didn't know that going into this when I first read it. It was just like, it's neat to see this is the earliest time I know as a start to that sort of trend.
So if you haven't read the book, just a little bit of background. It takes place in Styria, which is this really small backwoods kingdom. The main character is Laura, who lives in a country estate with her father, her two governesses, and a bunch of servants.
Bertha.
Yeah. She has no friends. They're not close to the local village, and all of the people in the local village are peasants, and she's kind of a higher class. Her mother died when she was young. Her dad kind of just spoils her rotten, so she's kind of this naive, spoiled, sheltered girl who doesn't know a lot about the world. Excuse me. And near their estate is this abandoned village and castle that used to belong to this ancient noble bloodline from that area. And the last lady of that house was Marcala, whose portrait Laura and her father have under their care. And Carmilla is actually Marcala, but she is pretending that she's actually a descendant of Marcala. And that kind of goes into the anagrams that we were talking about. But other things, hunchback, a woodsman.
Yeah. There's just like little things that I noticed that show up in like newer horror stuff. Like you always get your Igor hunchback.
Yep. Not in Frankenstein at all.
Yeah, not in Frankenstein at all. But here it is in Carmilla.
I can't wait to reread Frankenstein and then watch the original movie. Like, what the hell?
Are we gonna have like a similar It Chapter 1 experience?
Maybe, I don't know. We'll see.
I wish I liked the book less. Mm-hmm. My new dream is to get just famous enough to write a screenplay that's a faithful adaptation of Frankenstein.
Where he's a creeper and lives in the walls and watches this family for months and months.
I think that there's like real horror potential with that.
Yeah.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
All right, so let's jump into characters. We're mainly just going to talk about Carmilla and Laura. We'll mention a couple of the other characters. So before we get into some of the specific questions that I have here, what are your just general thoughts on Carmilla herself?
I see you got written here, victim or villain. I would say villain. Like, once you kill so many people, I stop feeling sorry for you.
So it's funny because there's a description in the story of how she was an innocent girl and she was bitten by a vampire and turned into a vampire. And in that case, you know, she is a victim, but then of course she turns into a monster and she kills tons of people herself. Yeah. Which you would then classify her as a villain. It kind of reminds me of...
And she kind of has a super predatory trait where she goes to women under false guises and talks about how much she loves them, and really she's just using them the whole time. If Carmilla was a dude, no one would forgive this sort of behavior.
No.
So...
Something else I wanted to mention is that you could view her as a victim because she was a victim to a vampire herself, but then you also have to turn that back on the vampire who turned her, because most likely that person was a human who was turned by a vampire. It's kind of like the child abuse like cycle where you're like, well, this person was beaten by their parents and that's terrible, but their parents were probably abused by their parents.
My opinion is always the cycle needs to end with you.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, if you're an immortal vampire, that probably means death.
Yes. Which is, spoiler alert, is what happens.
Yeah. And that does suck. I'm not saying there's not a tragedy to that. There is a lot of tragedy to that. There's emotion and catharsis. Because I think we can all relate to a time where we were probably the bad guy in a situation and we didn't want to be.
Yes.
But sometimes you just are the bad guy in the situation. And that's my opinion of Carmilla, is she just being a victim of circumstance turned her into the villain.
Yes.
She's like the Joker movie Joker, not quite the comic book Joker.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
He was definitely the victim for the majority of that movie, but then...
But he crosses a line.
Yeah, I'm like, what justification do you have for what he did? Like, none. Exactly. How do you think, and you touched on this a little bit, how do you think Carmilla perceives her victims? Does she see them as prey? Does she see them as lovers? And then how does Laura differ from her other victims?
I viewed it as sort of a mix. I saw it as super predatory. It was almost like frat boy is the wrong word. Almost like a groomer. Like you I don't want to say pedophilic because that's not really in this story.
She's kind of date rapey.
Yeah. She comes in and she's like, "Oh, you're the most special person and I love you so much. Feel my chest. Let me kiss your cheek." But then you hear the story of the general, and she's done this how many times before?
Because she also did this to Bertha.
Yeah, she goes from person to person to person doing this. And you ask, how's Laura different? I'm like, the only account I have is Laura's, how she viewed her situation. According to the general, this girl showed up and she was best friends with her daughter, and for all we know, they had a similar relationship. She had a similar impression.
How Carmilla preys on Laura is different than how she preys on the other peasant girls.
The peasant girl. Yeah. Okay. I had a quote in here somewhere. I don't care about the peasants any more than I care about the magpies.
They're out,
something like that.
They're out on a walk, and there's a funeral procession for a little girl that presumably was killed by Carmilla feeding on her. And as they pass by, Laura stands up and sings the hymn with the people who are walking by to show her respects. And once they pass by, Carmilla gets super offended.
Yeah, she gets so mad.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Dracula 2000. Have you seen Dracula 2000?
I think I saw it when I was young.
Okay, well, spoilers for Dracula 2000 presented by Wes Craven.
No, I don't think I have.
Dracula himself is not weak to Christian symbols. They just piss him off.
Stupid Christian symbols.
And spoiler alert for that movie, it's because he's actually Judas Iscariot. So, that's the twist of that movie.
So, the way I kind of interpret it is like when Carmilla gets to a new area, she picks a target of the upper class who she's going to establish that like relationship with and feed on slowly over time, because she seems to be kind of classist.
Yeah.
So she might value the blood of a rich girl.
She likes the good stuff.
But while she's doing that and playing that long con, she does need to feed. So she's killing more peasant girls to sustain herself while she's building this relationship with Bertha, with Laura, presumably with other girls. So your English professor may say Carmilla is really a commentary on economic classes in Europe in the 1800s.
Shut up, Professor. She's just a vampire.
Yes, but she's a vampire that doesn't value the lower classes as highly as she does the Okay.
I'm Bill Denver, and I just want to tell a fun story.
Carmilla is definitely fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was something I picked up on Goodreads, actually, when I was doing some research. So, as we said, Lefano is Irish, and he grew up on Legends of Irish Fairies. The big one, and X-Men fans know this, is the Banshee. A Banshee haunts a family and foretells the deaths of a family members, and Banshees usually appear in three guises: a young woman, a stately matron, and a riddled old hag. And supposedly Lefano put all three of these guises of a Banshee into Carmilla. So the young woman is obviously Carmilla. The stately matron is Carmilla's mother. Do you have any guesses on the riddled old hag?
Not off the top of my head.
So I read a couple different answers. I don't think there's like a definite right answer. One is just the old hag is just the ever presence of death in the story. The other one is that the old hag could have been the woman in black that was in the Stagecoach.
Yeah, the one with bulging eyes.
Yeah, actually I have that quote in here in Scary Shit, but we'll bring it up now. So a hideous black woman with a sort of turban on her head, nodding and grinning derisively towards the ladies, with gleaming eyes and larger white eyeballs, and her teeth set as if in fury. So obviously, yes, this is most likely a racist caricature, and that is bad. But
at the same time.
But it could also be that this is supposed to be the third form of the Banshee, the withered old hag. To contribute to that, it travels with Carmilla and her mother, who are the other two forms of the Banshee. Obviously, there's no like right or wrong answer on this. It's just something fun to think about.
Yeah. I've thought about those two that were traveling with Carmilla a lot, so...
There's also the bodyguards who look like they're criminals, and Laura's dad is like, those look like they're an unsavory type.
They look like they might be from the upper middle class. They might work a blue-collar job.
As we said about Laura, we're going to jump into her. She's kind of naive and sheltered. She was spoiled by her widower father. She lives in the country. She hasn't had a lot of chance to socialize with people her own age. She's never been to a ball, which is kind of the like premier social event for European young people in this time, in this era. At the beginning of the story, she's expecting a visit from the general and his daughter Bertha, which is canceled because Bertha dies. And this is a huge disappointment to Laura because she's never really had someone her own age to spend time with. So it's really just her dad, and she has 2 governesses. Mm-hmm. And that there's people in the village near them, but they don't really interact with it. And they are pleasant, but they don't have like social outings with these people, makes it seem like. So when Carmilla comes to stay at Laura and her father's estate, obviously Laura is very excited.
This is new.
Yeah. What's this? No. What's this?
I had similar commentary for Susan from Salem's Lot.
Mm-hmm.
There's something new in my area. Disney Princess Syndrome activate.
He's a writer. Ooh, his wife died. He's an injured soul.
Yeah.
I gotta take care of them. Ben, is it Ben? Ben Nears.
It's been. I kept calling him Haystack.
Haystack, yeah.
So
Ben and Susan is not Stephen King's best romantic couple. I also don't think they're his worst.
They're not his worst,
but definitely not his best.
It was definitely early archetypes.
Yeah, and granted, that was his second novel. What are some of your general thoughts on Laura before we start talking about her relationship with Carmilla? Just Laura on her own.
She's very soft-spoken. She definitely wants more than what she's getting. There's almost a vague disappointment whenever we get to her friend's death. When she first shows up to the ball. Like, she feels bad, but there's also like, man, this is kind of spoiling the evening.
Yeah, she's more upset about it ruining like the social aspect of the evening than the actual death.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was like a class thing or an age thing, or maybe I'm just reading too much into that, but that's what the vibe I got. The
vibe I got was that it's more like that she doesn't know how to interact with anybody other than her dad.
Because she only lives in that castle with him and their servants. So.
Yeah, so she doesn't know how to talk to people, relate to people. She doesn't know what's proper. Like, yeah. I mean, she's been isolated. She's sheltered.
And that's the vibe I got from her from those early chapters, like pre-Carmilla.
Carmilla and her mom show up, and her mom gives this BS story that, I must make this midnight ride, and it's life or death, and I have to go, and Carmilla is sickly, and she can't make the ride. Can she please, I'll have to leave her with you. And her dad's like, oh yeah, sure, actually this is great, because my daughter was supposed to have this sleepover, and the girl died, so now we'll just replace her with Carmilla. So Carmilla starts staying with them.
It's like having a pet.
It's like having a pet. And
can she turn into a cat by chance?
Carmilla and Laura become fast friends.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think... Oh, excuse my beer. Sorry, dropped it.
Party foul.
My general impression is that some people might go, why is she so obsessed with this girl early on? Mm-hmm. But because
she wants to suck her blood.
I meant Laura.
Oh, okay.
Why is she so obsessed with Carmilla early on?
That makes sense to me.
It makes sense to me, but that's because I've been super lonely before.
I think the story does a good idea. It does a good job of establishing the first 2 or 3 chapters that this girl wants a friend.
She has 0 friends.
Yeah.
And this was before social media.
Yeah.
You could not just go to Twitter and have pretend friends.
This girl could basically read books, go for walks, talk to her dad. That's her life.
And part of me feels that some people might find that hard to relate to.
Well, I mean, it was a different era,
it was a super
time,
different era. But I have been the person who did not really have a friend before.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in that spot at points in my life. So
I'm sitting there and yeah, someone just dropped off on my doorstep. I'm gonna hang out with them as much as they let me.
Yo, what's up?
What do you like? Do you like Dragon Ball Z?
So they become fast friends. Mm-hmm. And then it starts sharing all these instances where they're alone, and Carmilla gets like super handsy and starts like, hugging her and kissing her.
Her love language is touch.
Yeah, she kisses her cheek, she kisses her neck. It kind of tugs you in two different directions as to whether Laura likes it or not. And my question is, does Laura actually reciprocate Carmilla, or is she under the influence of a vampire?
I don't think the story flat out says one way or the other.
It doesn't. I think it's up for interpretation.
I think there was God, I might be imagining this. I believe there was even a part where Laura was like, man, maybe she's a boy who just snuck into the castle dressed as a woman.
That was in there. And this is all just a ploy to have my flower.
Yeah. But she seems open to that idea.
Yeah.
She seems super open to it. I lean more towards Laura is just lonely, and she is taking a friend, even a friend who is kind of acting super weird.
So the first time I read this book last year, I read it as two homosexual women in a romantic relationship. When I read it this time, I read it more that Laura is a heterosexual, lonely woman who wants a close relationship with a female friend, and Carmilla is a vampire who's using romantic language and romantic contact
to manipulate her. Now, there's no way to say this without being controversial.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I know she's an LGBT icon, but she's using grooming tactics. This is... I see this and I'm like, this is stuff that, like, you would see I work in a correctional psych setting. This is stuff you would see from someone trying to manipulate, like, a new patient or a new prisoner. Like, oh, I'm your best friend, let me touch your arm. Oh, is that a new watch?
Carmilla is Ezra Miller, and Laura is, like, the girl that Ezra Miller groomed.
Yeah,
or
allegedly.
The person. Yeah, allegedly. I'm sorry. Yeah. Don't sue me.
But
so
that's the vibe I got, and I understand that the LGBT community needs and loves icons. I agree with that. But when you're taking the story in its historical context, Carmilla is doing a bad.
I want to bring up the lesbian icon thing again when we get to Kiss Me Fat Boy, because I have more to say on that. Mm-hmm. I do think you could interpret this either way, being it that they both have feelings for each other, or it's more of a predator-prey thing. Mm-hmm. I think it's never explicitly stated
one way or the other. I'm just telling you the vibe I got.
Yes, I agree. That part is vague, but I don't think you can really argue that that's Laura's perspective.
Yeah.
From Carmilla's perspective, I don't think that you can really argue too much that Carmilla is viewing Laura as sustenance. Maybe a meal that she values more than other people, and maybe Carmilla is also enjoying the time she spends with Laura, but that doesn't change the fact that she's still going to feed on her.
Yeah, she literally shows up next to her covered in blood from chin to knees.
This book is so good.
Like, at that point, I'm like, she's literally feeding on the person she's professing love to. That's an abusive relationship.
Yes.
At best.
So just some more notes I had on Laura. I like the fact that, it's already talked about how sheltered she is because she's cut off from other people and she lives in the country and so on and so forth. But even more than that, they make a point of saying that she's raised without hearing fairy tales. She knows nothing of the occult. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the dream. Let's go to that, and then we'll touch on some of these other points. Mm-hmm. So when Laura is a young child, she dreams of being bitten by an adult Carmilla. And when Carmilla comes to stay with them, Laura recognizes her from the dream.
It's as if I've known you all my life.
And Carmilla says, well, I had the same dream when I was a little girl, except you were the adult and I was the little girl, and I was under your bed and I saw you in the bed. So essentially they had the same thing, except for they were different ages. When this dream happened to Laura when she was a little girl, everybody says, oh no, that didn't happen. There was nobody in here. Mm-hmm. But after that, somebody always stays with her in her room every night. They check the closet. They check under the bed. there's even a point where she's a little girl where a man in black came into my room with some beads and said some prayers, and they don't explain it to her, but there's a priest who's coming to bless her room to protect her against vampires, I guess. But they really keep Laura in the dark to like the umpteenth level.
Yeah.
So then back to the dream. What are your thoughts on what that means and what actually happened, if anything happened?
To me, it was a prophetic dream. Minds meeting across space and time, which is something that kind of comes up in more modern vampire literature. Mm-hmm. And modern vampire interpretations are like, we've known each other across lifetimes.
Edward.
Let me quote one of my favorite vampire movies. I have crossed oceans of time to find you.
Is that Twilight?
No, it's from Dracula. It's from
the 2001.
It's from Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. Yeah.
I've crossed oceans of time to
Which
find
is why
you.
I think it gives me more Carmilla vibes than it does Dracula vibes after reading Carmilla. And this is probably where a lot of those like romance interpretations come from. It's like a soulmate-y vibe.
Yeah.
But one that's doomed to tragedy because of the nature of one of them.
The first time I read this, as I said, I was much more viewing it as like a real romance. Mm-hmm. And I think I was kind of playing down in my head Bertha and Carmilla's relationship with Bertha, just because I really liked the romantic relationship between, or at least the idea of a romantic relationship between Laura and Carmilla. Now on the second read, I'm like, I'm not so sure. But all right, so let's just mention a couple of the smaller characters. Laura's dad, something that always seems funny to me, but I know I understand it more with a historical context, is the fact that Carmilla's mom just leaves Carmilla there with Laura and her dad and just say, okay, I'll be back in 3 months.
You're in charge of her, mysterious old man I just met.
I mean, and it sounds weird, but it really, culturally, talking about 19th century Europe, it was not weird for strangers to be long-term visitors at someone's home.
Yeah.
Like, travelers would come and stay and have dinner. Like, it was a lot of European cultures at the time prided themselves on being good hosts to travelers.
When you're going from, like, horse to buggy everywhere.
Yeah. Even, like, I was just reading Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, and there's that whole point where the cousin that they've never met, and he sends like one letter and says, I'm coming to visit and I plan to stay for 3 weeks. And it's just like, okay.
3 weeks. 3 weeks, by God.
Yeah. It's like, okay, cool. They've never met him, but he's coming to stay for 3 weeks. Cool. That's fine. I mean, it's part of their thing. And again, part of that is there's no social media, there's no TV. Mm-hmm. The only way people can really stay connected is by mail or long visits.
And mail takes forever.
And with strangers visiting, that's one of the primary ways that news passes. So if like, oh, you've just come from Berlin, what's the news from Berlin?
It's been 6 months since your last letter. What has changed? Well, I'm pregnant now. By the time you receive my second letter, I will be on my third child.
It's not like today where there are some people who post every single thing they do on Twitter.
The dad and the general gave me Mulder and Scully vibes. Have you seen any X-Files?
I've seen 5 minutes of one episode.
Okay, so Mulder and Scully. Mulder believes everything is supernatural all the time.
I'm familiar with the two from when they guest starred on The Simpsons.
And Scully is always looking for the logical explanation. So the dad comes in and is like, oh, she's been missing for an entire day right after you had a nightmare of someone just like gouging out your throat. Oh, she's just been sleepwalking, my dear. That's the most logical explanation. She just came from a different room, even though we searched every room from top to bottom.
Have you seen the X-Files episode of The Simpsons?
Mm-mm.
So Mulder and Scully and Leonard Nimoy all guest star on that episode, and it's hysterical. It's one of my absolute favorites.
And the general's just like, there's vampires everywhere.
Yeah, I originally had the General and Bertha and the Doctor all on the character list, but there's just not really...
There's not enough.
Yeah, there's not really anything to talk about. And with Carmilla's mom, The only real note that we have is that we don't really know what her deal is.
Or the black woman in the carriage.
Yeah.
I was waiting for that to come up the first time, and when I was re-listening to it, I was like, man, did I just forget what happened about this?
Nope. It just, you don't get to know.
Yeah. And sometimes that's better. Here I'm like, man, I'd really kind of like to know.
There are a lot of sequels and prequels and spin-offs written on Carmilla that were not written by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. Other authors have, because this is something that's in the public domain now.
Yeah.
So anybody can write about it. I'm curious about those books, but it's not like honestly, it's not a big priority for me to read any of those.
Kill you all! I'll drive you crazy, and I'll kill you all! I'm every nightmare you ever had. I am your worst dream come true. I'm everything you ever were afraid of.
Moving on to scary shit, I think there's creepy things.
I think waking up to a woman covered in blood next to you is kind of scary.
I mean, waking up to somebody, like, literally biting you, a giant black cat in your room.
The giant black cat, I've had so many nightmares about cats lately.
I think the woman in the carriage, just the idea of some freaky woman, you don't know what her deal is, why is she there, that's kind of creepy. But as far as, like, is the book scary? No, not really. I do think it was probably pretty scary for its time, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine, like, being somebody who's had, like, no real exposure to horror fiction. Obviously, there's no movies, no television, no radio. The only horror fiction you have are stories that are told by mouth, or these novels and short stories. And probably, this was 1872. Probably, unless you're somebody who has a big library, your exposure to these type of stories is probably pretty limited. So if you're a little kid and you've never heard a story like this, and your dad brings home the book and reads it to the family, like, well, one, Dad, maybe read these things before you share it with the kids. But two, it's probably pretty scary at that point.
Hunchbacks are pretty scary.
Yeah.
They show up and they just give you pendants.
They sell you pendants. You gotta pay for that shit.
It's a microtransaction.
Oh my god.
You got to pay for this accessory, love.
Kiss me, fat boy!
Kiss me, fat boy. I want to talk more about how she is a lesbian icon, but first, well, no, and tied to that. Okay, so what we were talking about earlier, some people may be upset that we're not really seeing Carmilla and Laura as, like, a legit romantic relationship. However, I still think that you can view Carmilla as an LGBTQ plus icon, not because she had a consensual romantic relationship with Laura, because she didn't, but because she was a lesbian character from an 1800s novella where the homosexuality is not portrayed as immoral or villainous.
Yeah, that's never brought up as a negative aspect. I don't recall it ever being anyway.
No, it's morally ambiguous. It's not described as good or bad, it just is.
The closest it comes to even being questioned is when Laura goes, maybe she's a dude in a dress.
Yeah, and I mean, that's honestly how it should be. It's not...
Yeah.
Being a lesbian isn't good or bad, it's just you're a lesbian.
Yeah. It's the fact that she eats people that makes her bad.
I have so many jokes about lesbians and eating people, and I'm not even gonna...
Bite the nipple!
Yeah.
I bet vampires would be very good at piercing you.
Probably. I have a quote that I wanted to read.
Okay.
Sometimes, after an hour of apathy, my strange and beautiful companion would take my hand and hold it with a fond pressure renewed again and again, blushing softly, gazing in my face with languid and burning eyes, and breathing so fast that her dress rose and fell with a tumultuous respiration. It was like the ardor of a lover. It embarrassed me. It was hateful, and yet overpowering. And with gloating eyes, she drew me to her, and her hot lips traveled along my cheek in kisses. And she would whisper, almost in sobs, "You are mine. You shall be mine. And you and I are one forever." Daniel, feel how hard I am.
He's pretty hard.
Very hard.
I give this exact same speech when I ask someone to swallow. You and I shall be one forever.
Because you cannot pass my semen. We'll be stuck in you forever.
It will be one with your proteins.
Ew, gross. We're gonna put in the boo sound effect here with the audience booing. Boo! If I don't cut out all of this. Okay, so sexuality is pretty common in modern vampire literature, but it's not really present in Dracula or a lot of the other work of the time. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Okay, so here's the long-winded one. Is a lot of people read sexuality into Dracula and probably other older stories that I don't really think is there. They're like, oh, there's a piercing and an exchanging of fluids. I'm like, yeah. By that logic, a dog bite is a sexual allegory in a story.
Oh man, Cujo makes me so horny.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's people reaching. I do think that there's like some sexual undertones in Dracula. Like you have the three brides kidnapping Harker.
Yeah.
And you have like his, I don't want to say rape of Mina, but it's rape adjacent.
Yeah.
You know, he's trying to influence her and take her over against her will. Mm-hmm. Those sort of things are present, but it's not written in a explicitly sexual way. It's written in a way where sexuality is something you have to project onto it, where it could really just be anything.
Or at the very least, this whatever sexuality that exists in Dracula does not compare.
It's way less.
Yeah, than what's in Carmilla.
Dracula obviously wants Mina to be one of his brides, and there's some latent sexuality in that, but they're not. It's not like modern interpretations where he's in love with Mina and wants to hold her hand, and there's passionate kisses.
I don't have a lot of experience with the Twilights and the True Bloods, and but all of that seems to be pretty sexed up.
I unfortunately do. So yes, vampires have been very sexed up in recent years.
Anne Rice.
Her books are basically just a bunch of asexuals having sex.
You know, what's funny is Stephen King's vampires aren't sexed up.
No, not really.
Well, actually, no. Dr. Sleep. Never mind. Those are the most...
I haven't read Dr. Sleep yet.
Those are the most sexed up vampires that ever existed. They have orgies after they eat children.
I was almost done with Salem's Lot before this recording, and it's just like, no, I just want to eat everyone. I am classist allegory. Allow me to invade your small town with my Walmarts. That's Salem's Lot.
Yep, it is.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
Power of Christ compels you just a little bit on vampires and Christianity and Christian symbology. You talked a little bit about this earlier, and we talked about how it doesn't seem to be like a weakness to Carmilla so much as it just offends her.
Yeah, it like really annoys her. She wants to plug her ears.
So this was a quote I found while doing some research. Carmilla works as a gothic horror story because her victims are portrayed as succumbing to a perverse and unholy temptation that has severe metaphysical consequence for them. So basically, from the Christian perspective at the time, vampires are unholy. They're servants of the devil.
They're unnatural.
People who are victims of vampires are succumbing to a non-Christian way, and that they're punished with what happens to them, either becoming vampires themselves or, being killed, being drained of their blood.
Why assume your religion is the same as mine? That's a fair question for a vampire. What do you do if you have a Jewish vampire? Do you get the monsters?
Boom, 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 boom,
and then the pendants, there's a superstitious quality to them. There's a lot, what would you call it, like folklore superstition in this book?
Yeah.
Like, these pendants will keep away the vampire.
It's almost like iconography with the pendants. These...
Carmilla finds them almost quaint.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, you think this will protect you? That's cute. I will take 2.
Yeah, I'll take one too. And she even makes a point of saying that something attacked her in her room, but as soon as she grabbed her pendant, it went away.
Yeah, she's like, oh, allow me to manipulate her further with your superstitions. I thought that was actually kind of funny and clever.
If you can't tell, I really like this book.
I like this book too. I don't have as much... probably what you'd call like modern interpretations or praise for it, but I do
I just
really
think it's
like
fun.
it. Yeah, it's a fun book.
I think it's better than Pulp. It's
better than Pulp. Spoiler alert, it's not going to rank above Dracula for me.
No, me neither. So the content is kind of pulpy, but it's also just written super well.
It's very fast paced.
Oh my God, are you Stephen King? No, I'm Dean Koontz. Oh.
Let's go ahead and jump into Kings and Koontz's, and I'm going to go first. And my king is actually a quote that I just adore from this book. It stood out to me both times.
Is it the dream quote? Because that's also my king.
It's my... Okay, I'm going to read it. This is just... If you've listened to our podcast a lot, we don't bring up quotes a lot. I think we both appreciate good writing, but this isn't the kind of podcast where we're just going to read sections of the book to you. Yeah.
We want you to read the book and read it with us.
But this is just so beautiful. I can't not bring it up. Thus fortified, I might take my rest in peace, but dreams come through stone walls, light up dark rooms, or darken light ones, and their persons make their exits and their entrances as they please, and laugh at locksmiths. Like, it's
so good.
Yes, you cannot escape your dreams. If there's something that you're afraid of, it's going to show up in your nightmares, and there's not a fucking thing you can do about it.
If they ever reboot Nightmare on Elm Street again, this quote should be at the beginning of it.
So that's both of our kings. Koontz, do you have a Koontz?
I really struggled with the Koontz. I think I'm going to settle on saying this is from a doctor's papers at the beginning, and then the doctor just amounts to fuck all. When this really could have just come from Laura's papers.
Yeah.
I gave the reason why I think that is. I think that's a Times thing. Where there was even more sexism.
Yeah.
I didn't see the point. I love journals and using like journal accounts and found from the doctor's paper sort of things.
Yeah, as you are a Dracula fan.
Yeah, so. But this is just I don't get its inclusion.
From the phonographic recordings of Dr. Edward Seward.
Yeah.
I don't have a real strong Koontz. This one is kind of like a nitpicky thing for me.
So's mine, so.
Yeah. I think that once you get past the general story of what happens to Bertha, so once that ends, from there to the end, I think it jumps around a little bit, and most of the book has a really clear flow, and it's really easy to understand. But I think just those last like 2 chapters kind of jump around a little bit, and I had to re-listen to part of it to say what exactly happened to you.
There were some like exposition,
heavy
scenes.
And that's, that's nitpicky.
It's fine.
And this is such a short book. It's an easy one to reread. Both of us have read it twice. I will definitely read this a third time before I pass into the great beyond. Hope
I'm going to be immortal. I'm going to take the path of vampirism.
Okay, it's time to rank this bad boy. Our novels and novellas list so far have been exactly the same. From the bottom, our lists are The Scarlet Plague, Phantoms, The Stand, Firestarter, The Mist, It.
Oh god, I think this is where we finally diverge.
Yeah, it probably will be, but I am putting it third from the bottom. It's going to be above Phantoms and below The Stand. Maybe I enjoyed a little bit more of The Stand, but The Stand is just such a broad epic, it feels...
I think that the highs of The Stand just far outweigh anything you get from Carmilla.
But there is nothing that like pisses me off in Carmilla. Like there are things that in The Stand, but I mean, it's, I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to put it there below The Stand, above Phantoms.
Okay, so this is where we finally diverge. Mine's right below Phantoms.
Okay.
Right above The Scarlet Plague.
I think you're a little more nostalgic for Phantoms than I am.
Yeah, I really like Phantoms. I love its mystery aspects.
But don't take these rankings to mean that the books on the bottom of the list are bad.
No, this is just the order we like them in so far.
Yeah, and...
Have we read a book we don't like yet?
No. Both of us have The Scarlet Plague on the bottom of our list, but I really like The Scarlet Plague.
I also really like The Scarlet Plague.
So I've really liked to absolutely love every book we've read on like our TV and film list.
Yeah, that one's a little different.
That's where there's like maybe like 3 or 4 things I really like, and the rest of it is either okay, it's fun.
Is this finally worse than Phantoms?
Yeah, or it's total garbage.
What if Pumpkinhead 4 is worse than Phantoms?
Oh, we are doing a bonus episode on Pumpkinhead 4. I cannot wait to watch it. I'm gonna have to rewatch the first 3 though. It's homework. So your homework prompt is Carmilla as a story between 2 men. Go.
Okay. So what it is a couple friends decide to start a podcast together.
Oh, God.
And one of them slowly lures the other into a romantic relationship with increasingly sexually tense books. Your turn, Ryan.
Do you remember the movie Bruno?
Yeah, I remember Bruno.
Do you remember where he is trying to no longer be gay, and he goes to the Reverend for advice, and the Reverend says, well, you should do some manly activities with other men, so he goes hunting and camping with those redneck guys?
Yeah.
So that's the premise. So Sacha Baron Cohen is Carmilla, and like the redneck guy whose tent he sneaks into and gets naked and sneaks into his sleeping bag. That guy is Laura. So he has to try and get, the whole premise is he's trying to get into that guy's pants.
I'm gonna be honest here, I don't know whose I like more.
They're both. No, I like mine more.
Mine just makes you feel uncomfortable.
A little bit, but not too much. All right, so for the listeners, our question for you is, how hot does Carmilla make you? Because I didn't go deep into this.
I wanted to go deep into this.
I get a little randy. Like, there's some points that are a little steamy. I like it. So reach out to us on social media, where all of our socials are going to be at the end of the show, but you can find us on Twitter, HorrorPod69, and we're available on Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff. So let us know. Does Carmilla get you going?
Yes.
And also, I have not actually seen any of the Carmilla adaptations, so if there is a really good one...
If there's a good one.
Yeah, let us know. We'll watch it, do a bonus episode, but I'm not familiar with any of them. The one that sounded the most interesting to me was the Universal one that's a sequel to the 1931 Dracula.
Dracula's Daughter.
Yeah.
I think I have that one.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that. Maybe we won't. We'll see. But I mean, but to me, with my limited knowledge, there's not like an iconic Carmilla adaptation that you have to watch.
That means we need to make it.
Yeah. Unlike with Dracula, where you've got Nosferatu, you've got Bela Lugosi Dracula, you've got the Christopher Lee one, all the Hammer stuff, the Francis Ford Coppola one, Dracula Dead and Loving It with
we got to add that to the list now.
Yes. Oh God, I love that movie.
We'll do a live reaction.
Oh my. The scene where he gets stabbed and all the blood comes out is so funny. And we should also do Young Frankenstein when we yeah. Okay, some further reading. I've got this broken up into 2 sections, and Daniel, the vampire guy, please add to these as I go. So, classic vampire literature, obviously Dracula and Powers of Darkness, also Dracula's Guest, all by Bram Stoker, The Vampire by John William Polidori, and The Family of the Vortilak by Alexei Tolstoy, which is the Russian one we talked about earlier. For modern vampire literature, I really highly recommend Salem's Lot by Stephen King and Dracul by Darcy Stoker.
I highly recommend Interview with the Vampire
by Anne Rice.
I think both the book and the movie adaptation are great. I am less stellar on the sequels. That is my hot take as an Anne Rice fan. I would also recommend Hellsing, both the manga and the anime, as a modern vampire sort of story.
I was not crazy about the original anime series.
No. Watch
Hellsing Ultimate.
Watch Ultimate, yeah.
Yeah, that's much better.
It is much better.
I never got to read the manga, but I've always wanted to because Nazis. There's lots of Nazis in it.
There's a werewolf in it, too.
Nazis are the worst thing that ever happened, but if you want to get me interested in a story, just put a Nazi in it. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah.
I like when you mix, like, the Nazis with the occults. That just...
Oh, yeah. Fucking Indiana Jones, Hellboy, like, all that stuff.
I'm like, yeah, I'll watch that. That sounds great.
Exactly. What was that Nazi zombie movie we watched with Ash? Nazi Zombies in the Snow?
Yeah. We also watched the one with the werewolf and, was it FDR?
FDR, American Badass.
Yeah. Because they were Nazi werewolves.
We should do an episode on that.
Yeah.
That's one of Hef and I's favorites.
My little legs.
My little hot dog legs. Okay. So upcoming on the Horror of Babylon, we have 2 active Let's Plays going on now. I'm playing Missed Messages, and new episodes of that are dropping every Tuesday at noon. And Hef is still playing Amnesia: The Dark Descent.
Hang in there, Ryan.
Yeah. Oh my god. His new episodes of his playthrough of Amnesia are happening every Wednesday at noon. We just set up Daniel's PlayStation to stream, so he may be doing some live streams coming up.
I plan on doing the Nun Massacre because I just found out that Puppet Combo commissioned books to be made off of their games, which took me back to like reading the Resident Evil books as a kid. Ooh. So my plan is to stream the Nun Massacre and talk about the book while I'm playing it.
So it just came out that Salem's Lot, the new movie, was pushed from September of this year to April of 2023.
That didn't cause us to switch gears last minute.
We had our entire August and part of September based around Salem's Lot because we were going to do the book, both miniseries, the 2 short associated short stories, Return of Salem's Lot, the Tales from the Crypt comic that inspired Stephen King, So we had to throw all that out the window. So we will be doing Salem's Lot next year. We want it to be topical. So upcoming on the Horror of Babylon next Sunday, July 31st, will be our episode on It Chapter 2. And then the following Thursday, we will be dropping a bonus episode comparing It and Phantoms. That will wrap up our It coverage until Welcome to Derry comes out, whenever that happens. It's been a big journey.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. Our next novel, instead of being Salem's Lot, will be The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft.
Which might be one of the times I have the most to say.
Yeah, I've never read any H.P. Lovecraft ever. Like, the closest I've gotten to H.P. Lovecraft is...
When I told you to Google his cat's name.
No. Stephen King's Jerusalem's Lot.
Oh, okay.
And that one episode of South Park. Cthulhu.
I do think pop culture has kind of ruined Cthulhu, but...
Yeah, that's okay. And then the next Sunday, August 14th, we are going to cover the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society's film adaptation from 2005 of The Call of Cthulhu. The next book episode will be August 21st on the short story by Rudyard Kipling, The Phantom Rickshaw, which we are reading because the title is cool, but we're also going to get to compare who's the bigger racist, H.P. Lovecraft or Rudyard Kipling.
Spoilers, it's Lovecraft.
And then the last Sunday in August, the 28th, we are going to review the 2014 classic film, Call Girl of Cthulhu. Which neither of us have seen, but we saw the poster and the name and we're like, fuck it, we're going to cover this.
Yeah, that's what we're covering. We could have covered South Park, but we're covering this.
I think that South Park episode will come up.
Yeah, probably a lot.
So yeah, we've got that. We do also have all of September planned. We will announce that stuff as we get to it. But so if you're reading along with us and you're done, you finished up Carmilla, the next novel will be Call of Cthulhu, not Salem's Lot. I apologize for the schedule change. However, the whole reason why we were doing Salem's Lot when we were doing it was because of the movie. So, but we will do it next year, for sure.
I know this might sound strange coming from a literary podcast, but we do try to be as topical as we can be.
Yeah, no, we covered Firestarter when the new movie was coming out. Mm-hmm. Salem's Lot. We're going to do The Exorcist when the remake comes out. We're going to cover Uzumaki when the anime comes out. We try to be as topical as we can.
Yeah.
You know, and that's good for like the
algorithms,
the YouTube algorithms and such. So yeah, you know what we should do when we're planning season 2 is look up a list of movies coming out next year.
Movies and shows.
I'm actually going to add that to our to-do list real quick.
That might be the smartest thing we've done.
All right, and that does it for Carmilla. Both of us are big fans, highly recommend. And if you're looking for an easy book to read to start reading classic horror literature, highly recommend Carmilla.
Yes, sir.
All right, well, thank you for joining me, Daniel.
You're very welcome, Ryan.
All right, thank you for everybody for listening. Stay tuned for our socials and stay scary.
Stay scary, everybody.
And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share and subscribe. Follow Daniel at dstarsick on Twitter. Follow Ryan at Darth Damio on the Bluebird app. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/the Horror of Babylon. And finally, you can let your friends know that The Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Podcast Addict, TuneIn and the iHeartRadio app. Stay scary.